Facing massive odds, Bryan Harsin fought for his job and won the battle. Now, what's next? Welcome to the Voice of College Football, talking Auburn, and the news announced just on Friday that Bryan Harsin has been retained after a fact-finding mission by the administration. We got Vernon Speak Sports on the line to help us break it all down. How's it going, man?
Hey, what's going on? What's going on, Mark? I'm definitely glad to be back on the channel to talk about Auburn football. We've been doing this now for about 2.5 years, and definitely glad to be back on the show. And for all the Auburn fans out there, it's great to be an Auburn Tiger, War Eagle.
Harsin called this the hardest week of his life. Let's go back to the beginning of the unraveling, and before we start to dive into why Auburn kept Bryan Harsin. So Auburn got off to a nice start to the football season, beat a couple really good football teams, were 6-2 at one point. Lost the last 5 games of the season, most notably blew a 25-point lead against Mississippi State. They finished 6-7. Mike Bobo's let go just a couple days after the season. Offensive coordinator moves on. The one that really got to a lot of people and raised some red flags was Derek Mason, highly thought of defensive coordinator after just one season on the job at Auburn, stepped down. He eventually went to Oklahoma State and took a $400,000 pay cut. And then you've got new offensive coordinator Austin Davis, only in the job for a few weeks, and he steps down based on personal reasons. And then there were a lot of things that just started to be unraveled, nothing specific, but a lot of comments made about, Harsin's mistreatment of players and assistant coaches. Recruiting was down. Recruiting class was not up to where Gus Malzahn had reached certain standards. So then the administration said, we're going to go through an inquiry. We're going to find out what's fact, what's fiction. There's social media posts all over the place. We're going to dismiss those because none of those were certainly proven. So that's just hearsay. But the administration determined that it was going to retain Bryan Harsin and that he is fully committed to the football program. He fought for his job, and he has kept his job.
I think Bryan Harsin, came to Auburn with an expectation. He had certain goals that he wanted to set forth. He murdered the transfer portal in a good way to piece together a good personnel to have Auburn competitive in, the SEC football and Power 5 football. And if you look at down the stretch, Auburn was, the margin of error was razor thin. You talk about a couple of plays here and there that could have had Auburn either in a New Year's Six Bowl or either in the conversation for, a possible berth in the SEC championship. And the crazy part about it is once Auburn had the victory over Ole Miss, the cards were in their favor. Everything that needed to happen outside of Auburn happened, but Auburn just didn't hold their end of the deal. You talk about the collapse against Mississippi State. You talk about the epic fail at South Carolina, and you talk about, the Alabama game was probably as gut-wrenching as you could possibly come. And you probably not even having this type of conversation at Auburn University right now. Do I think Bryan Harsin failed his first year? You can say a yes and a no. I think yes, because you go 6-7 your first year, you lose the last 5 games of, your season. But no, because he had an opportunity in every single game he played after the Georgia game. His players never gave up. I just think, based on everything involved, I think Auburn did the right thing in continuing his tenure at Auburn at this point.
Yeah, just going back to the football before we dive into some of this other stuff, most notably that Alabama game. So you're playing the first or second best team in the country, and it's easy to go to any team and say, well, they could have won that game, they could have won this game. Any one-score game, you could say, well, if they made a play or two. No, that was a game in which Auburn, if they would have made different decisions down the stretch, just simply Tank Bigsby staying in bounds, the game would have been over. You can do the math with the time on the clock. The game would have been over. As it was, Not too many teams out there are taking Alabama to overtime. So I thought that was a tremendous game that they played. You mentioned the Ole Miss game was a really good win. Arkansas turned out to be a really good top 15 team in the country. Auburn won that game by a couple scores. The Mississippi State collapse obviously was aided by Bo Nix breaking his ankle and having to leave that game in the third quarter while it was still up in the air. Certainly they didn't replace his level of play with TJ Finley. So that's what happened. The bowl game, you got to kind of dismiss to a certain extent. It's a loss. It's on the record. It's a loss, but missing 3 of the 4 best defensive players on the team for that game against Houston.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you go into that game and everyone, knows that with the NFL draft at bay, some of your best players will opt out for especially the Birmingham Bowl. Not to discount or not to dismiss, but we have to, count real where it is. If you're planning on trying to vie for a spot in the NFL, if you're Zacoby McClain, hey, I might want to sit this one out because I don't want to risk the injury in a bowl game like this. I think Auburn, even in that game, played very well. The players never gave up. I think they were dedicated to the cause of, what Bryan Harsin and his staff had in place. You talk about a 17-13 win. I mean, a 17-13 loss against a ranked Houston team. This was a really good football team that Auburn lost to and had an opportunity late to win the game. But it came down to the things that hurt Auburn down the stretch. Where was Auburn hurt down the stretch? It all usually starts with Auburn in the late portion of the second quarter, all the way to like the early to midway portion of the third quarter. There's some decisions that are made that changes the trajectory of the game, and Auburn just was not the type of team that could recover from some of the bad coaching decisions, some of the bad mistakes, and that's where Auburn fell down the stretch, even in the bowl game.
So why did Auburn keep Bryan Harsin?
Well, there's a couple of reasons that I hypothesize Auburn keeping Bryan Harsin. Number one, from what I saw on the football field, it was actually a pretty decent brand of football. It wasn't a brand of football where you look at Auburn and scratch your head and say, hey, man, these guys are terrible. These guys are losing some of the most pivotal SEC games by double digits, and it's not even close, right? You have a game against Alabama, who is superiorly talented against most teams that they will compete against. Auburn takes this team into 4 overtimes. They then go into the bowl game and, they collapse there, but then you have some depleted staff, so to speak. But then you think about the financial ramifications. Why would you, considering that this guy's not doing an absolutely terrible job, even though the 6-7 record is not, the most formidable for any coach in any level of play, especially, I mean, I don't know what you expect in a first-year coach to go. Maybe they wanted him to go, national championship like Gus Malzahn, or in the second year, go to the national championship like Gene Chizik. But I think this was a fair depiction of where Auburn was personnel-wise, and to fire a coach, considering that, the competitiveness was there in every single game, to run the risk of an $18 million buyout when you could give this guy another chance. I never thought it made sense.
So to me, the bad optics didn't have a whole lot to do with football, because I picked this team to go 6-6. And when you lose the last 5 games of the year, that's a bad look. But at the same time, as you mentioned, none of the games were blowouts. They were competitive. They're playing some of the best teams. It wasn't necessarily the football. It's once you get done with the season in which, just based on the wins and losses, they collapsed. They lose the last 5. Then again, you've got a defensive coordinator who's well regarded leave the program. He ends up taking a job for a lot less money. Nobody does that.
Right.
Number 2, you have a situation with your offensive coordinator, your new offensive coordinator, who's never coached a game there. And he steps down for quote unquote personal reasons. And I don't know what those are. and then the recruiting's not up to standard, and players are leaving through the transfer portal, and then there are all these rumblings about players being mistreated and coaches being mistreated. So you add all that up together onto 5 consecutive losses, and then it becomes, I don't think any head coach should be fired after one season unless there are misconduct issues off the field, and that's what they were looking into apparently.
Well, here's the thing with Bryan Harsin. Bryan Harsin pretty much pedigreed as a Boise State coach. He ventured out and tried his luck at Texas, stayed there a year, stayed at Arkansas State a year, but he always had the option to come back to the friendly confines of Boise State. Apparently, there was a hard-nosed, culture at Boise State to where he could do some of the things that he's attempting to do at Auburn that kind of sort of work. But this is a situation with Bryan Harsin to where there's no option. Boise State is not an option for you to go back. And I say that to say this. This is an opportunity for Bryan Harsin to grow as a college football head coach, especially in an environment that he's not accustomed to. He's not accustomed to some of the rigors of the SEC from a recruiting standpoint, how you have to do certain things to wow some of the kids here. Because what he was able to do to wow some of the kids in Boise State, that may not work here. If you look at some of the players who talked about Bryan Harsin, they talked about he's a great coach, but he can't relate to me. That means this is an opportunity for a great coach, a coach with a great opportunity to have some massive success at Auburn. He has to kind of loosen the reins a little bit. He has to kind of learn the culture. He has to kind of learn what will reel these guys and buy these guys in. I'm not saying that he has to change his overall philosophy, but whenever you go to a cultural differentiating circumstance, I think you have to kind of loosen up a little bit. You have to kind of understand, hey, what makes these people happy? Why is Nick Saban so successful? Why is Kirby Smart so successful? Even though they have the same pedigree that I do, but why are they able to reel these guys in, whereas I'm struggling? So he has to understand, just like I've had to understand professionally, what got you here won't always keep you here.
Absolutely. And it would go a long way for him to get in front of the football team. And certainly, you should stand by your code of ethics if it's reasonable. Certainly, your code of ethics, your morals, your values, and that should be the core of you. But in regards to some of the things you're talking about, get in front of the football team and say, be very, very honest and say, hey, I'm committed to this team. I just fought for my job. You guys know what's going on, and be very transparent and honest, because you can't fool anybody in this day and age. There's too much out there on social media, and these student athletes know what's going on, and just say, hey, I fought for my job because I love my job. I'm committed to you. I'm committed to this football program. I want to win here. I want to get this done. I want to help you get to the NFL or pursue whatever dreams and goals that you have. And obviously, we've got some issues here. Obviously, there's some things that I'm doing that aren't effective. So I need to know what those are. Help me get better. Help me to improve. Help me to see the things that maybe I'm not necessarily seeing, or that I'm aware of, that I've got a blind spot, and I need you to help me.
Yeah. And it's a situation like you said before. And this happens in, corporate America all the time. And even with the line of work that I do, it doesn't really matter all the time as the leader what's important to me. What I have to understand is what's important to the people that report to me. Because I think about the great Nick Saban. He asks his team, his players, hey, what do you want to do? What do you want to accomplish? What do you want to achieve? And then once he finds out those things, then that's where the accountability starts. To where you start to see, okay, well, you told me that you wanted to be a first-round draft pick as a defensive back. Now, based on what you're giving me, you're not going to achieve those goals. And I think Bryan Harsin, I mean, for a lack of a better way of putting it, listening to his pressers when he first onboarded as an Auburn coach, looking back at it, I think he came on a little too strong. I think I still think he wants to achieve the goal, but I think he came on a little too strong in not knowing the totality of the culture that he was coming into. Now, if Bryan Harsin can figure that out, if he can figure his fan base out, because his fan base wants a lot of things. His fan base wants, consistency. His fan base wants consistency in play calling, consistency in keeping Auburn's best interest in mind. And if he can't do that, then he won't be successful. But now I will say this situation with Bryan Harsin being retained at Auburn is a golden opportunity for him to double back and establish the proper rapport that you need to have with not only your fan base, your boosters, all the people that are willing to support you, but you can't have that butthole approach, that my way or the highway approach, especially in the SEC, where you have to get the players' optimal level of play in order to even compete, let alone win.
Yeah. That schedule doesn't get any easier. It's pretty much the same schedule they had last year. It's everybody in the SEC Western Division, in which nobody's a bad team. No. Everybody's good in the whole division. It's the only division in college football. Everybody's good.
Yes, sir.
Got to play Georgia. The only team in college football outside of the division in the SEC East that's got to play Georgia every year. And then, of course, a date against Penn State again. So the schedule is brutal.
I mean, it's absolutely brutal. But the thing that is in Bryan Harsin's favor is the fact that you have 5 straight home games to begin the season. You have an opportunity, you talk about Mercer, San Jose State, teams like that. Then you got the big one against Penn State. First game on the road against Georgia. You have an opportunity to either be, 4-1 or 5-0 going into that game, depending on how the Penn State game goes. However, you have to take advantage of that opportunity first, because if you don't take advantage of the opportunity in the front end, it's going to be real brutal on the back end. And just like Josh Pate, Late Kick 24/7 says, it's not, and you see it, Mark, you see it in the SEC. It's not a lot of wins to go around. Texas A&M is one of the best recruiting teams in the SEC. Where's their 10-win season? You know what I'm saying? Like, it's hard to win in the SEC. So Bryan Harsin has to take advantage of all of those opportunities. I don't think he has the talent to beat Georgia, but he does have the talent to at least win about, I'm doing like an early, way too early prediction with Auburn, considering the 5-game home start. I'm projecting Auburn can win 7 to 8 games, but that's going to be tough, and to caveat all of that with the drama that's going on at Auburn, I just don't think he puts himself in a great position unless he's willing to, I'm not going to say compromise, but he has to bend but not break, not only with his team, but with the fan base, and to give himself an opportunity to have a good recruiting class in 2023. Because if this 2023 class tanks, he can absolutely forget it.
Yeah, he's got to have an improved season. Not anything crazy like 10-2, but like you say, there has to be notch a couple more wins, and then recruiting is going to be crucial, of course, as it always but especially for him to show that there's a future there at Auburn. So Bryan Harsin, it seems somewhat inconceivable, or it did a few days ago, keeps his job, fights for his job. The fact-finding mission proves out. I'm sure money had a factor as well, but Bryan Harsin has a second chance to make it a go at Auburn. Vernon Speaks Sports right on here on YouTube. Check out his early prediction on Auburn and his other content there right here on YouTube, Vernon Speaks Sports. Man, we appreciate you stopping by, as always, breaking this thing down for us.
Yes, sir, man. I really appreciate being on here. And also check out Mark Rogers' portion of Auburn football on his channel. He's has a whole channel dedicated to Auburn football. Please check that out. He's got a lot of content creators that go over there. I've seen E2C. I've seen War Rapport. I've seen it. Hell, I might be on there. Probably.
Heck, you are. Of course, you are.
But like I said, guys, down in the Deep South, college football is king, and on the plains of Auburn, the battle cry is War Eagle. I really enjoyed this tonight, Mark.